Es geht weiter mit den Irradiation Service Days. An dieser Stelle mit einer englischsprachigen Diskussion. Let me switch to English so everybody can understand me. Future of radiation sterilization. We called this session. And the question is, will one technology succeed? Will there be a coexistence of all approaches that we had touch points with today already, or will there be entirely new developments? We will talk about the future of radiation sterilization now in regards of technology, market, demand, as well as the role of politics, of course, and regulation. Paul Wynne is with us, chairman of the International Irradiation Association and seasoned expert in irradiation industry, former CEO of Asia and Africa at Synergy, and director of the Society of Sterility Assurance Professionals. He is with us via Zoom from the UK. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Morning. I hope you can hear me.
Good morning. We can hear you, and it's good to have you. And with us on stage, Dr. Andreas Ostrowicki, managing director at BGS. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Paul, let us begin with sort of the lay of the land, with all the articulated problems we addressed in the morning already, but also with regards to technologies and where we stand, where we are headed in the near future. What is your big picture?
I think the most important thing is that all technologies will be required for the foreseeable future. And I would broaden that beyond radiation, I'd say the EO as well. So when we look at the picture today globally, ethylene oxide is still the biggest technology, followed by gamma. They're the backbone of global sterilization. In individual country, all of these technologies at the moment face challenges. And the challenges exist at a global level, but they're also regional and at national level. So there are different challenges in different places, but I don't see the overall picture changing dramatically. There will be an increase in the use of accelerators and in X-ray, but it's starting from a very low base. So it's going to take quite some time before you see that taking a significant share of the market. So for a long time to come, we're going to be reliant on gamma and EO.
Yeah, and I think you have sort of a history lesson for us as well, because change doesn't come easy, change doesn't come quickly, and I think you have, from your own past and from the implementation of technologies, you have an insight for us.
Well, I can give you two examples that come to mind. One is the first time ethylene oxide was under challenge was back in the late 80s, when there was concern over freon emissions into the atmosphere, ozone depletion and so forth. That technology in the early 90s, most people thought that EO would be of little importance going forward. But it rose to the challenge, and now it's still a major technology. The same happened in the US in 2014, there was an appropriations bill that they were trying to put through that would have made it very difficult to use radiological material for sterilization. The industry came together, representations were made before the appropriations bill was implemented, changes were actioned, and the downside of that was averted. So these things do arise every now and again, and we can avoid them. The key is being aware of what's going on and engaging and being positive about what we can do to change things.
Mm-hmm. How we get there, we will address this a little later. Andreas, there's no doubt to get a clearer outlook, we need to look at the rather complex factors: increasing demand, limited capacity right now, availability of materials, as we discussed before on the stage, price development as well, supply chain, but also regulation, and this has been a huge part in the discussions we had in the morning. How would you describe the current and future landscape in especially Europe and Germany? And we will later on try to zoom in from a world perspective to the German perspective as well. So what are the main roadblocks, the main perspectives we're facing right now?
Yeah, first of all, I would say I cannot agree more to what Paul just said. I think we will see still the variety of modalities, simply because there's also, it's not only a market issue, it is a technical issue.
Right.
Yeah, we need for certain products, for certain applications, we will need ETO also in the future, and other applications you will be able only to deal with irradiation. Regarding the big picture, I would raise the question where we will see the growth. In my view, we will have for a foreseeable future a stable supply of cobalt, but we will not see the big growth rates because the production is relatively inelastic. You cannot just scale that up. That is the one factor. The other factor is that X-ray, as Paul pointed out, I think in terms of application, it's very similar, but we have a big factor here that it is a very high energy consumer. So the energy efficiency is, whichever way you count it, in the range 7 to 8%. So the question is, if you look what's going on in the moment in electricity prices here in Europe, I have really doubt that this is able to capture a bigger market share. Yeah, certainly in that extent that if you have no gamma capacity, you will be looking for alternatives. And what for me is really interesting is what will happen with electron beam. I think, and in the sense what Paul said, making best use of the technologies available, I think it should be really considered wherever possible to use eBeam, because it's a very fast method. It is probably the most efficient way to deposit energy into the product, so in terms of efficiency.
Sure.
But of course, we have the limitation that based on density and properties of the product, it might be not suitable where you have to go then to gamma, but wherever you can choose that. I would suggest that this is probably the most direct way to ease up these supply issues we have in the moment.
Very, very interesting. Paul, let us try, because I said this before, let us try to zoom in from a global perspective and show kind of how the world ticks in this concern, because we have a lot of worries here, quite frankly, in Germany, and we addressed those in the morning as well already, and in the European perspective as well. So how does the rest of the world look like when it comes to sterilization?
As I said at the opening, I think each globally and nationally, regionally, there are individual challenges. Some of these are self-inflicted, and they're inflicted because of a lack of understanding. If you take gamma, one of the problems there is that it's licensing. It's getting the permission to build them. But the industry has actually been investing. There are reasons why there's a tension in supply at the moment, but actually the investments are being made that will solve that in the future. So it's a temporary, and we probably would differ in terms of views as to how long that tension will exist. But in other technologies, it's a question of accessing this. How quickly can you build new infrastructure? So people need clarity. They need to know where they're going. They need to be making those capital commitments. And it will take there are a limited number of suppliers for accelerators, which are used both for EB and X. Lead times are quite long. But it's also the regulatory environment, when you look at places like the US, that's preventing investment in ethylene oxide at the moment, because the concerns over what the EPA is doing again in the US, which has an international influence. You've got the actions of the Department of Energy, where they've been concerned post 9/11 with the security of gamma radiators. But I would argue that the industry has really risen to that challenge, and that security is now not a major issue. The only concern there is really availability of this. But there's a difference as well between in terms of meeting the demand that exists today and meeting the growth demand. Some of the problems that exist, as I say, are self-inflicted, and it beholds both the sterilization community and the medical device manufacturers to work together to better educate our regulators and our politicians as to the impact of some of the decisions they're having.
Do you think there's a special picture we're facing in East Asia where maybe ramifications are less, problems are less, regulation is maybe a little less?
I think in some ways the post-COVID or as a result of COVID, I sense that there's less foreign direct investment into China. There might even be people moving back towards manufacturing in the US. So I don't see a shift in manufacturing towards Asia. If anything, once you look at quality assurance, regulatory affairs, oversight of facilities, I see more evidence of people. So there is a shift in locations to some extent. But again, it's a complex picture because it's the infrastructure of sterilization requires fixed investments, a lot of money, and it takes time to build. And so, supply chains come into this as well. But no, I don't see Asia from an EBX point of view. The manufacturers of equipment there have actually been focusing more on the accelerator market and on the wire and cable, heat shrink tubing market than actually the sterilization market, because that's easier for them at the moment. So I think that sterilization focuses much more on Europe and North America.
In comparison, Andreas, we've been talking about the big picture in Germany and in Europe to quite an extent in the morning already, but what's the main differences to other parts of the world as Paul just lined out?
I would think it's pretty similar, just in another playing field.
Okay.
If I look at this, what you mentioned, Paul, the situation regarding ethylene oxide, this is quite dramatic. That what you see in the US, that there have been emissions. Finally, the thing went to the EPA. Now the situation is in the courts. First trial now, just in the last few days, just to mention a penalty of $360 million for one case. There's 700 more in the line.
Yeah.
So I think this will have also an impact probably on Europe, as we already see that there is a shortage in capacity too, and people are looking even over the ocean to start sterilization here in Europe.
Right.
And we have virtually, I would say, the same situation that we can say government action here is limiting availability of a critical raw material now in the second year in a row. So I think that leads really to the point that we need to be more aware of making these the importance of this technology as a key request to the medical device industry more known and more present at the regulatory bodies and to the public also. Yeah. That we say this is of course, especially here in Germany, I think this discussion is very critical with everything about nuclear.
I know.
And this is this situation where you basically, wie sagt man das, Kind mit dem Bade, to pour the child out with the bath. that critical parts here for this industry are blocked or are destroyed, and we need really to make sure that it is understood what kind of consequences there are.
How we come to this common understanding, we will address this towards the end of this session, and maybe you think about it a little bit how we might get there. But one question I would like to address with you, Andreas, as well is, what do you think under this umbrella we just defined, worldwide, both and national European base, and indeed, class action lawsuits are a big threat for the industry, of course, and that changes the playing field pretty much. But I would like to address the very different question about the evolving picture. How do you think the industry will develop in a sense of in-house sterilization and contractor sterilization under this big picture?
Yeah. So first of all, it's of course a bit of a difficult question to a service provider.
I know.
Maybe my view is a bit biased here, but my analysis on that is really that I think especially in the last year that we, due to I think the COVID situation really triggered this, that we had an additional surge in demand, what led to longer lasting supply shortages, that some of the bigger players started investigating the way to start up own sterilization facilities. And yes, I think if you have a critical mass and if you're a very big user, there might be some reason, but we should not forget it is quite a complicated technology you need to get into. We have the regulatory aspects to run such a facility. That means nuclear or radiation protection issues. And then there's the whole process that you need really to make sure that you have all the steps set up to run an own sterilization facility. And in my view, it makes only sense with the very, very biggest customers. That is what we also see in the market. Otherwise, and there's also the question of backup. Often a single plant is not helping you really. You need to look to have alternatives in case you have an interruption in your systems. So I see that rather critical. I think there's many good reasons to work with a service provider.
Paul, I will give the question to the non-biased member of this panel as well, but let me please really quick address our listeners as well. Please feel free to ask your questions for this session via Slido. You can do this on the platform anytime you like, and we will integrate your questions into our flow of the discussion. Paul, in-house or contractor?
I think there is a level of interest in in-house, and I think it comes down to people wondering whether there's an option to install almost self-shielded X-ray systems in-house. I don't think they're going to happen quickly or easily, and there's two reasons for that. One, I think the manufacturers of high-energy accelerators have their order books full. They're very busy providing high-energy machines for the contract radiation market that will be able to do a vast array of material. Secondly, I think that as soon as you move away, if you're going to really optimize an accelerator, either in EB or X-ray mode, for a particular manufacturer, you need optimization in both in the machine, the accelerator, but also in the product handling equipment. And I think that significantly increases the cost, and I think that it is and you need to integrate it with product handling and all sorts. And the manufacturers of this equipment are very focused on trying to increase the capacity to meet the demand that's coming from the contract sterilization market today. And I think that the other critical point is what Andreas was referring to in terms of backup supply. You know, if you're reliant on a single system, if it goes down, and we have a number of new challenges. We have in terms of not only whether there could be power outages today, but actually, and it's not just in parts of Africa that's likely to happen. It could happen across Europe and in Germany as well, but also the quality of the power supply. So when you're looking at either the voltage or the frequency of machines, you've got to take that into account. So I think everything sort of points to the fact that you need more of a facilities with a mix of different modalities and skill sets and backup. And that seems to be the way to mitigate risk and to optimize throughput and processing, and there are other ways we could address in terms of trying to get more out of the existing capacity, but that's a separate question. But in terms of the question that you ask, do I see this going in-house? No, I don't. I really don't in the foreseeable future.
Any additions here?
I just had some thoughts about the energy situation, really.
Right.
I mean, if you look at that, especially if you talk about X-ray, you're typically talking about machines in the megawatt range.
Sure.
So typically, I calculated a machine is similar to 5,000 households or so, a single machine.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that fit into our picture, what we have?
It doesn't.
I mean, we will electrify the whole industry.
Yeah.
We want to heat with electricity, we want to drive, we want to make steel with electricity.
Yeah.
So I think it will not be plentiful available, it will be expensive. And in that sense, I see it rather a backup for if you should have shortages with cobalt. Mm-hmm. What we don't see really in that sense on the production side, the cobalt would be available. And I very much hope that we have in the next 2 years additional capacities online. That this situation will be rather over. And here we have a quite simple technology. Right. Where you see there is not a lot of very complicated machinery. What you have, the energy is more or less a byproduct of a nuclear power plant. It doesn't consume extra energy when produced. So there's a good reason, at least, to have this, to maintain this as a workhorse in that situation.
Yeah, cobalt available but not accessible. This is maybe the big picture in Germany right now, and we discussed this before. Paul, I would like to go back because you mentioned it with the question of in-house or contractor, the risk taking, but I would like to rephrase it much more general for the whole industry and all the pitfalls and all the problems that come with it right now. What are the main factors here? Andreas just lined out a few of them: regulation, of course, availability, the monopoly situation or the almost monopoly situation when it comes to cobalt, for instance. What do you see on the horizon, and which risks would you judge we should really embrace, and which should we avoid?
Well, if you talk about cobalt, there is a very particular reason why there is a bit of this tension in supply at the moment, and that's because some of the leading suppliers to the people that the industry buys off, the reactor companies, are actually going through refurbishment programs or investment programs in order to increase capacity. So when you look out, there are contracts out there that go through to 2060, 2064. The investment is being made that will refurbish facilities and reactors or bring new reactors on stream that will be able to produce cobalt. And as Andreas said, cobalt is a specifically manufactured isotope with a short half-life that decays back. It's used for about 20 years, but it becomes low activity after about 120 years. So these are not long-lived isotopes. Mm-hmm. So I think once you get through that refurbishment program, and that's a whole, it's a big topic to talk about, but I think that there will be increased availability and we'll be back to a more normal state. But that's a few years away. That's I'd probably be less optimistic than Andreas in this. And I would say it's certainly the late 2020s. It's probably into the 2030s before that's really back on stream. But it's there, and it's going to continue to be a viable technology, assuming that we don't get regulations or politics that get involved and say that it's not going to be available. Mm-hmm. The same will be true of, I think, if you look at EBX. There is a lot of demand. There's a lot of interest. You're producing the X-rays or the EB. It's an accelerator. So those are being purchased, installed, manufactured as quickly as they can be at the moment. So the industry is investing in that technology. The tension with gamma wouldn't be as bad if it wasn't for this issue that you've referred to in class actions and so forth in the States. But EO rose to that challenge. Part of the problem at the moment is the EPA haven't put out new regulations as to what is acceptable. And there's a lot of divergent opinions as to, as far as I can see, that the emissions are actually less than background. So but that's stopping people investing because they don't know what the environment is like. So it's a perfect storm. Some of this man-made. We're creating these problems through the regulations and through the at a national or international level. So, and meanwhile, the medical device market is growing, and it wants. So, if gamma was just under a bit of tension, and EO was still available, and EBX was expanding to help solve the problem of the increased demand, then we wouldn't see such a problem. But it's the threats that's being placed on gamma and EO that make it more difficult to accommodate the demand. And that's why I don't think this is we should be working together. We should be communicating and educating people as to what the true risks are and what the benefits are. Yeah. And change can happen, but it requires education. And just as we saw with the appropriations bill in 2014, if we work together, we can enlighten people.
Yeah, we will get to the means of communication, the means of collaborating in the near future in a bit. But Paul, let me ask you this: with all the sustainability debate going on, and we can easily figure out that the sun shines in Northern Africa much more than in the UK, for instance. And will we see sometimes a picture where the energy-hungry technologies will be situated right there where the renewable energy will be produced?
No, I don't think so. And I asked a similar question on a conference at a conference last week, and I was interested to see, well, in the event of we do hear people talking about backup systems, about using solar or battery backup to these systems. And I think the answers, the interpretations I got from the answer from manufacturers was in accelerator mode, when you're using an accelerator for EB, then using batteries and solar as a temporary stopgap is feasible. It's not feasible in X-ray mode because of the power output. I think, but then you look at what's happening, you go back to the point that you need stable power. So it's the quality of the power, and that's in terms of voltage, frequency, waveform, and so forth. And you need to avoid power outages because, conditioning these machines, bringing them up, optimizing them, and so forth, it's complicated. And they run best when you have a stable power supply. So I don't see us getting in the near term to a situation where you can use solar or something to run these. These are 10 MeV machines. They're with the energy and the power requirements are significant.
Thank you for this insert. And let us come to the communications question before, Andreas, please.
There's maybe two things I would like to add from the words said. I think if you compare this, coming back to your earlier question, if you compare the situation ETO USA and Gamma Europe, I would say there is one fundamental difference that we had in the US with the EO plants for quite a while, relatively high emissions, which were allowed by the EPA, by exemptions. I would say comparing that to gamma irradiation, we have had not that kind of history or these kind of issues. I think this is coming to a point that society starts really to question if it is acceptable to have these plants near housing, near schools, and so ever, and you have emissions of these toxic materials. I mean, the difference with irradiation is we don't have these situations. We have clean and secure plants here. I would rather call that self-inflicted by our systems and by our society. One topic also to add is maybe if you talk about supply chain of cobalt, sure, it is a very long term. Everything is long term in this business, but very encouraging also, I think, are news that we hear now that big players are considering starting cobalt production within Europe. That for sure will not be in Germany, but it could be within the 2030 range an option that we get also more independence and a more robust supply situation. Although I expect that will be a slow change. But I think we come back to the question: what does society want?
Right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
if we say we want sterile materials, we have the two main methods. In the end, it comes down to the point that you have to destroy microorganisms, and you need suitable agents to do that.
Right.
And
yeah. Paul, let's try and paint a picture of how the players will come together, which bodies, which entities will be part of this collaboration, communication playing field that you defined in your introductory remarks already, and that we touched a little bit. How would you see this design coming up when it comes to sterilization?
Well, I think it comes down to communication. It comes down to education, communication. And there are a number of examples of how that's already happening. There is a group that operates through the IAEA that's called the Transport Facilitation Working Group. That deals with issues around the movement of cobalt-60, and where there are cases where you, even though you're compliant with the regulations, you still get denial of shipments or denial of movement. So, and I think so there are focused initiatives. When the appropriations bill came out in the US in 2014, industry, a variety of players, from hospitals to nuclear medicine to contract sterilization to suppliers, all came together to try and engage with Congress and the House in the US. So I think it's that sort of discussion. Groups like you mentioned, the Society for Stewardship Assurance Professionals. Although our focus is on radiation, and radiation is one of the working groups within that organization, we also have groups looking at biocompatibility, about aseptic, about EO, about packaging, and it actually gives us an opportunity to engage with AMI, PDA, and others. You get increasingly products again. You mentioned materials. You get drug-device combination products these days, and the world is becoming more complex. The requirements for understanding and proving you understand sterility assurance. So together we have a stronger voice, I think, is the message. Whether it's at a national, regional, or global level, we have a duty to help the medical device manufacturers to say, look, you want the materials, you have to help us to. They're not suitable for patients until they're sterile. So, we need to make them aware of the tensions that exist, and they do exist. Taking one or two plants out a few years ago in the US resulted in the FDA issuing warning letters about a shortage of supply in certain areas. So we are at a critical point where action is. I think we thought that this might stabilize, but actually I think it's getting worse, and we need to be on top of it and ahead of the game.
Quite direct or even boldly, I don't have the authority to decide on something like that, but would you be willing to speak at bodies like BVmed here in Germany?
We already do. We try to engage, and it's not just us. We're just a mechanism, but it's people who have specific expertise in different areas are prepared to stand up and speak and engage. And I think sometimes we're better speaking as in collaboration. Otherwise, individual companies, often the response from regulators and governments is, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because you have a vested financial interest in it. Right. If you can broaden the community and broaden the interests, then I think we're taken more seriously as a community.
True. Thank you. We are coming closer to the end of this session, but we have a few questions that popped up in the meantime from our listeners. Thank you for this, ladies and gentlemen. And the first one goes to Andreas. Are there any specific demands from you to the politicians on how the supply situation should be ensured?
Well, I would say we have actually the frameworks. What is in the nuclear laws, what are basically at a European level with the kind of same framework. But we discussed earlier this morning. It is, I would say, the national interpretation and what you make out of this framework, that we have the impression that Germany here goes very far. And our demand really to the politicians is to take a more realistic approach, that we have the feeling that we get sometimes, we or the transporters in that game, that we are confronted with demands what are simply not, where you can say you stop action because it's too complicated, too tricky, and you can't fulfill these anymore.
And Paul, again, I mean, there's good reason to say that some international aspect would be very, very helpful to help the discussion going on, because if you move in your own bubble all the time, you think you're doing the right thing, as a regulator. And if we have more international influx of ideas, of best practice models, for instance, would mighty help, wouldn't it?
Well, I'm going to use this as a little bit of a plug, because the next time that we as a community come together will be, we have an international meeting every couple of years that's been impacted and delayed by COVID. But the next international meeting on radiation processing will take place in Bangkok in just over a month's time. So that will bring together, there are forums on sterilization, there are forums, it looks at the technologies, there are scientific components to this, and it will bring together medical device manufacturers are going to be there, as well as equipment suppliers, as well as contract sterilizers from around the world. Right. That's a great forum where we actually will discuss and debate these issues and try to come up with action plans and so forth, and learn what the latest developments are taking place. But it's, you can't underestimate the value of networking aside from the presentation component of these meetings. It's actually who you get to know, who you can speak to, and just having those conversations over a drink in the evening or something. It's a very powerful component of deciding how to take these things forward. So that's in a month's time, and I know Andreas and his team will be there as well.
And we do hope that the message will be heard here in Germany and in Brussels as well. Paul, a quick one. I do remember that Andreas mentioned this, but maybe you can both speak to this a little bit. Can you briefly wrap up the subject of the mentioned ETO suits in the US? I think you mentioned it, Andreas, right? Can you go into this, or Paul, would you like to? Just very briefly.
I'm not that close. I just think that the technology roads, as far as I'm aware, and I've actually been involved in constructing a couple of these facilities in Asia. The contract sterilizers have complied with all of the regulations that were out there, and I don't really understand what the. I've listened to some of the videos that are trying to almost whip up concern, and I think one of the big concerns that people have is if the current regulations are not appropriate, tell us what are, and we'll work to those. But in the absence of that clarity, it's hampering investment, and with the sort of Damocles of lawsuits hanging over them, it makes them less willing to invest. Now, that's going to apply to medical device manufacturers as well as contract sterilizers. Nobody really is prepared to move in that environment. And so they're creating this issue has been going on since about 2018. So it's taken a long time, and it's not clear yet and it creates a great deal of uncertainty in people's minds. And therefore problems. So that's not radiation sterilization. But and I think just to end on the EBX side, I think the future is very positive. There's People are working hard. It's certainly going to take a bigger portion of the sterilization market, but it's starting from a very low base, and therefore change will take a long time to happen.
Yeah. Andreas, last word for you. Do you share this optimism?
I share this optimism in the sense, I mean, in the moment we have the situation, of course, Germany, the cobalt transports are blocked. We have the issue of exploding energy prices, what blocks the alternative X-ray. But I would also take the European view. I mean, I think in looking at Europe, I think we will have other solutions, and there will be ways to provide capacity, and we will be working hard on that. And I rather see this rather for a couple of years still the shortage with cobalt. What we will do our best to manage that really. And then we should work to open up alternatives. As I said, eBeam, we should consider maybe talking about certain standards. If we can use SAA level 5, that could be a way. And I would wish really that this topic of sterilization should move a bit, not a bit, a bit more higher on the strategic agendas of the medical device producers to take really the long-term view on that, and as we discussed today, really that we make the thing publicly aware and that the public understands really what is at stake here also.
Mm-hmm. So communication and collaboration is key. One of the learnings of this very fruitful discussion, I would say. Paul, Wynne, Andreas Ostrowicki, many thanks for this interesting discussion. And I shall close with to be continued. Thank you very much, gentlemen.